Eons are synchronous with astrological ages. Right now, we only recently entered the age of Aquarius, and it was Aleister Crowley who linked Aquarius with the Eon of Horus, which we have recently entered. Now, why is this important? The Thelemites believe that we transition from and into different eons. The Eon of Isis, Osiris and Horus, with each having their fundamental collective characteristics. Isis being the matriarchal feminine eon with fertility gods and worshipping of the mother, with gods of chthonic nature. Osiris being the patriarchal or paternal eon with sky-orientated religions, gods of time, a fascination with death, sacrifice, resurrection, which all associates with individuation, the death of ego or the avoidance of archetypal possession, which is the image of Jesus, or for Christ is the man who doesn't get possessed by his unconscious, mythologically speaking. And of course Gnosticism, which is what Carl Jung called the emergence of psychological law, all founded upon the symbols of the unconscious individuation process. And now we have the Eon of Horus, which is that of the crown child. But eons are usually consistent within around every 2,000 or so years, so our lifetime probably won't be very characteristic of the eon itself, but more of us exiting the previous one. But that doesn't mean that there is no collective initiation within the psyche. There most definitely is, for that is how we exit one and enter into another, and that brings us into what the crowned child actually is, which I honestly think is one of unbounded curiosity, and that isn't with a moral judgment. I see it more with an immoralist perspective in a Nietzschean sense, which supports the kind of vulnerability of the crown child, but also the notion that the destiny of society is in the hands of the youth. The symbol of the child is mistakenly and commonly characterized with folly, confusion, naivety and stupidity, but it is also more symbolic of renewal and curiosity and creative independence, which is more profound because most things done by a child are based on the premise of curiosity and exploration. But both these sides are extremely relevant of today, especially the prior in the past few years. So within the mythology, Horus is the son of Isis and Osiris, which is an interesting point because it hints at the general synthesis of the two to make a new era or new order, or to psychically allow for the development of a group consciousness, which is more contemplative than polarizing, more sustainable than one-sided in the long run. But right now it's more of a redefying of the old structures within the previous Eon of Osiris. Just to make this point more evident, as an example, it was only a couple of days ago that the Vatican announced that they cannot bless same-sex unions because it is seen as sin from their religious perspective. And that is basically the nail in the coffin for them or the consistent flogging of the dead horse, because the church is a structure from the previous Eon of Osiris, basically. The patriarchal structure which placed sin on those who worshipped the earth, the pagans, the druids. So really, it doesn't even need to be done out of action. It will just happen. These structures will eventually crumble away, not into a place of collective biased denial of contempt, but rather into a place of acknowledgement rather than overseeing power that they may have. Kind of like a form of spiritual egalitarianism, a kind of conscious individual understanding. And this itself is what the Eye of Horus represents, the all-seeing eye in conjunction with the age of Aquarius, the ever-living sun. Realizing that the sun never died but continued to live heightens spiritual consciousness of life after mortal existence, or the belief that life continued after death. But also self-realization as the eye is open and can see everything, which makes sense why it has been so often associated with the third eye, and the pineal gland. And we get this more often now in today's culture that has aligned itself with the age of Aquarius, with people who are joining into what you could say endeavours like veganism and vegetarianism, which is based on a reshaping of morality. But for some also has elements of panpsychism, I think, because it's a heightening in compassion for not only sentient beings, but all things with a possible consciousness, which gives it a bit of a modern pagan touch, if you will. But also things like this channel and other channels similar to mine. I haven't even been doing this for like a year yet, and we've over 60,000 subscribers. You know, Crowley talked about how the eon of Horus will be all about following one's true will under a kind of universal love. And that's very much what I try to do with this channel, and what other channels similar to mine are trying to do as well. So Edward Edinger said the following in relation to Jung on Aquarius. I quote, "If my reading of the symbolism of Jung's Ion, which is one of his books, is correct, the Eon of Aquarius will generate individual water carriers. This will mean that the psyche will no longer be carried by religious communities, but instead it will be carried by conscious individuals. This is the idea Jung put forward in his notion of a continuing incarnation, the idea that individuals are to become incarnating vessels of the Holy Spirit on an ongoing basis," end quote. Which is very interesting. But a lot of what has been happening in the past 6 years with regards to activism is this swinging motion of confusion within the youth, which kind of shows the vulnerabilities of the crowned child, or the child archetype in this sense. You know, the Great Reset, recently, which has been popping up over the past year, is an interesting point with regards to all of this age of Aquarius and the Great Conjunction in association with all these things, because I see that entire agenda as an attempt for the old patriarchal corporate power structures to nestle themselves into this new Eon of Horus that they want to direct by cloaking themselves as the crowned child with these new environmental futuristic desires, which is seen as more egalitarian, sustainable, liberating, but really it is just the same powers from before that perpetuated their own previous history. So it's not legitimate, it's not genuine in a sense, I think anyway. So the saying "you own nothing and be happy" from the likes of Klaus Schwab at the WEF is interesting, because you could say that is the life of a child. It's completely dependent on the mother, or in this case, will be dependent on the state. Let's roll out UBI, let's make everyone have codependency on the state, there's no jobs, and all this type of thing from the pandemic, or the outcome of the pandemic and all of this. But this is obviously a response to the new Eon, in a sense, to sublimate its arrival through the people so that Horus, or the child, does not become crowned, or that the crowning of the child within the Eon itself is masqueraded by these other structures, which are the same powers that existed before but want to continue their duration. And this to me reveals the vulnerability and the possibilities for deception on a large scale, because the power structures of the previous Eon won't want to fall for the new, so they will try and contort themselves into a particular shaped box that they think will suit the new paradigm. And any kind of politically motivated institutional structure has the wiggle room, to do that. Unlike these traditional institutions which have been grounded on a dogmatic set of values, which will just inevitably fall because they cannot, wiggle themselves around the new paradigm, or that is destined to occur, or the view that the collective consciousness will have. But a true example was the GameStop situation, because it was a collective group of people, and it still is, with very little individual power of themselves, enacting their will to power collectively in a sustainable manner to essentially hack the stock market, which is the purest example of the crowned child. is in this Eon of Horus, I think. But this is even more interesting when we look at Nietzsche, because when he wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote a chapter called The Three Metamorphoses, which is basically his view on the philosophy of change, because the last metamorphosis is the child, going from camel to lion to child, which links in nicely with the aeonic shift, because I see this entire chapter as being a description of how collective change occurs on a mass societal level. Crowley talked about the night of Pan, which in Thelema is the mystical state that the individual enters, which represents this stage of ego death in the process of spiritual enlightenment. And Pan was a Greek god representative of Dionysian nature, and I see this as being very comparative to the lion in the Nietzschean sense of this chapter, because as what he writes, he says the following: to create new values, even the lion is not able to do this, but to create for himself freedom for new creation. For this, the lion's strength is sufficient. End quote. So it's this idea of ego death for the sake of change, which is no different from the traditional view of war. War used to be seen as a very spiritual endeavour, really. There has to be a war which involves people committing to ego death for the rise of new values, or for a set of holy values, for a new world, which is kind of like the ultimate sacrifice, really. And he continues on saying, once it loved as holiest thou shalt, which was what the camel used to live by, the values that shineth off the dragon's shiny scales, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. Now must it discern illusion and tyranny, even in its holiest, that it must snatch freedom from its love. For this there is need for the lion. End quote. And that aspect of freedom is also freedom from the ego, by attaining the freedom of the spirit. Because attaining the spiritual, you also become the spirit itself. The same reality that Pan experiences in Crowley's view. And that reality, or that circumstance within the process of change, allows for this change or aeonic shift. That at the ending and beginning of a new eon, there is that intermediate darkness, before the light. That is a definite possibility that we might eventually move into, on the basis that we move on from being camels and develop the spiritual, the spirit collectively, to bridge us towards that Übermensch, or that child, that crown child reality that will be of the future. The new world which we all want. Because if we don't, we won't realise or manifest the new eon, which requires new creation. It will instead be capitalised on by older systems in a vampiric, if that's even a word, in a vampiric manner, holding on for dear life to sustain that illusion upon the people that they will, build back better, which is another slogan used by government officials all over the world. It's a global slogan for a globally perceived elitist utopianism. So, what Crowley says is the following: the Eon of Horus is here, and its first flower may well be this, that freed of the obsession of the doom of the ego and death, and the limitation of the mind by reason, the best men again set out with eager eyes upon the path of the wise, the mountain track of the goat, and then the untrodden ridge that leads to the ice-gleaming pinnacles of mastery. And of course this also links in to many ways that technology is becoming more powerful, because, technology is the brainchild, child again, of man. But what I'd say is check out my previous video. Actually, what I'll do is I'll attach my last video I did onto the end of this one, because it links into a lot of these ideas of technology becoming more dominant, and the aspect of alienation of the own individual in association to the body and mind with relation to technology, and how that alienation in of itself that has occurred from the pandemic, and the outcomes has been the outcomes of the pandemic, will allow for the the collective psyche to be directed into this acceptance of transhumanism, which I think in a lot of ways relates to this eon of Horus and being taken over in a sense, in a deceptive manner with regards to, structures from the previous aeonic paradigm, in a sense. If you want to know a bit more on that in relation to transhumanism, continue watching this video because I'll put that on the end of it. But that's all for the moment, I just want to talk about that to you. It's an interesting idea, these aeons in Thelema, because it's very accurate, I think. All the confusion, all the curiosity, the dismantling of previous structures that is occurring, the absolute insane world we live in now, and how it all relates, to this new aeonic shift since we fell into the age of Aquarius only recently through the Great Conjunction. All aligns very well, I think. So we just need to try and not fall into any Maya, because the moment of it is, the amount of Maya that is on the surface of everything is at an unbelievable scale, and I think it falls down on part of what ultimately this all falls down on part of what the youth want, because they are that which bring about renewal, and that's what this aeon I think is all about. Because when all the old structures and paradigms fall down, it all becomes dependent on the youth and what the youth want, or, which is more of an important point, what will they be groomed or deceived into wanting or allowing to happen in the new world, or the world that it is today? That's the question, I think. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment and subscribe. Sign up to my newsletter at thoughtsonthinking.org. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video. The emergence of the unconscious opposite. When a particular way in which we carry ourselves becomes extremely polarized within our own actions and lives, it can become very likely that the unconscious opposite of that behavior can suddenly emerge. Think of an elastic band. The more tension I place on that band and the more I pull it apart, the more likely it will revert to its opposite form in a dramatic fashion. It will snap. That it will suddenly snap and revert to being loose in two parts. Or think of a bow and arrow. Highest tension of the bow leads to the sudden opposite of tension via release. So it's opposites within opposites. Now this is part of the hermetic reality of duality and correspondence, but let's think of this in relation to the collective psyche. Or let's say the way we envision an alien, or what an alien is. We have a collective archetypal vision of what an alien is and looks like, based on the unknown. What is the unknown to be characterized as? Most people would probably agree that an alien is frightening. Misunderstood and unknown, as anything unknown is usually frightening, maybe even symbolic of the unconscious. But, like the principle of enatiodromia, or enatiodromia, we consciously think of aliens as always being the furthest thing away from ourselves, in all forms, or as our counter-opposite as humans. When in reality, we through the collective psyche are becoming more like them. Shape-shifting and transmogrification is what is occurring due to our war on consciousness as a collective. So in this sense, we are unconsciously shape-shifting into our shadow opposite, without even realizing it. And this is all because we are acting in a way that is extremely polarized and unhealthy. When we look at the metaphysics of Taoism and the yin and yang, we come to understand that it holds the same enatiodramatic function. That when yang becomes yin, it is because yang reaches the point of extremity. Or if you want to relate it to black holes, which is due to polarization. Because psyche and matter mirror each other, and this would be called the point of no return, and that it suddenly becomes its opposite, like a black hole. You reach the event horizon, space-time stops, and the gravitational singularity becomes unescapable, which you could say is the complete opposite of non-gravitational space. The Big Bang singularity, as I said in another video, is no different from the mandala, and in this case, the black hole is no different from the yin within the yang, or vice versa, the sudden gravitational singularity within an expansive space of non-gravity. But of course, this symbolic enatiodramatic function occurs in the psyche, through repressions, psychic complexes, the shadow, etc. For a quick example, that is very relative to today, you'll start seeing this process occurring much more when people are in fear of government restrictions, comply and try to justify their compliance with, in this instance, compassion. And this fake virtue is made clear when they come in contact with someone who is not doing what they are doing in the same strict manner. Enatiodromia occurs, causing them to be the complete opposite of what their fake justification was, because it was never virtuous to begin with. It was more of a hiding of oneself out of security, of authoritarianism. It was only done out of fear, and that realization is made obvious when the inverted hyperexpression of compassion is expressed to that individual, which would be that of contempt and all the other behaviours which come along with it. But that's one modern example you could think of. But back to aliens. What is the archetypal alien? It is the polarised reality of mind. That is what the alien is. The alien is psychically disconnected from its own body. It's got an enlarged skull with a limp like a childlike anatomy. It's emotionless, it doesn't speak, it doesn't feel, it stares through your soul as if it is trapped seeking freedom from its own existence. But the most important thing of all is that it doesn't understand. Its eyes are so big as it seeks for knowledge because it doesn't understand anything. It's alienated, but it seeks something else. It seeks what it does not have. So all these archetypal characteristics and definitions are also slowly becoming symmetrical to what the human is becoming. Humans becoming more and more alienated, not only from themselves, but from the outside world and from their own bodies. And this is all very similar to the function of enatiodromia or enatiodromia, because we see ourselves as the complete opposite of the alien as archetypically described. But when really the unconscious opposite of that particular bias is likely to manifest, which it is. We are to become more alien in quicker succession than ever before with the expansionary development of technology. But why is this? Well, it comes down to the same reason why an alien is the polarised reality of mind. We ourselves are polarised within the left hemisphere, as I have said in many other videos. Or you could say we have been abducted by the left hemisphere, or the left hemisphere's way of thinking. Ever since the scientific enlightenment and the development of technology, the slow dominance of the left hemisphere has been slowly increasing more and more, to the point where you ask the question today, where did creativity go? That is the basic function of the right hemisphere. There is not much creativity anymore, in my opinion. The general understanding of originality has been compromised with novelty, and creativity compromised with shock. You get this in modern art, and you get this in modern music, especially in pop music or popular modern culture. The reason why imagination has died, in my opinion, in the general collective consciousness is because it is typically for the left hemisphere through its dominance to reform newness through novelty with what is already known. Modern creativity is understood through the reality of a recombination and recontextualization, which is not imagination, it's not the same thing, which the right hemisphere relies on for creative purposes. Popular music today is only very rhythmic. Melody doesn't exist because that is what creativity is, and creativity is unique as that is what makes a song memorable and unique, which is its melody. So for an example, lo-fi is probably a pure example of left hemisphere orientated music or dominated music. The reason why is because it is recombining songs from the past to make newness seem like creativity. The process is not creative or imaginative because it is purely analytic. Finding songs in the same key to combine determines the making of the song, or the recombination of two songs together, which is the intention of newness and novelty. So when you think of left hemisphere dominance, that is necessary to develop science, technology, and you know that these are the things that have led and developed our modern world, and you then see the ways in which this polarization of the left hemisphere has transformed all other aspects of human life, you come to understand how we are being abducted by this way of human evolution, or way of human thinking. And it was a while back now when I did a video with Stefan from Uberboy, which probably a lot of you would remember because it got quite a decent amount of views, I think about 40,000 views, where we talked about how the left hemisphere is Apollo and the right hemisphere is Dionysus. And I still hold to this because it is I think, proto-scientific expression of the divided brain through mythology. And it is nothing but a self-fulfilling prophecy when we look at the reality of today and how man is slowly becoming and allowing to become allergic to human interaction, which is the complete opposite of the human Dionysian expression, which is that of the body, sexuality, dance, movement, love, lust, expression, and creativity, mostly. So this complete imbalance is producing an inversion, which is making people think that human nature is the real virus, which links right into the transhuman digital movement which we are seeing in our modern culture, thinking that it is the cure to all of this. So again, it's this horribly enforced and conformed alienation, being disconnected from the body, which is an ungrounding of the mind, which is a disconnection from the true reality itself that is felt. Because when the mind is disconnected from the body, it lives in its head. It thinks too much and is easily deceived due to the thoughts that are ungrounded within one's head, and this all obviously raises psychosis. Or as we see today, the collective psychosis of thinking that, for example, one example, that the government are here to care for you, which is not the case. Which finally leads me to a kind of scary prediction, which is this, basically, of my own thought and feeling. The more we become alien or unknown of our true selves, the more likely we are to be scared of the human condition. And if we are going to be scared of the unknown and not face the unknown, we will eventually allow ourselves, mankind itself, through fear and self-inflicted hate of the human condition, to give up our own humanity to technology as a method of deceptive revitalization, or to see it as the cure to all of this, which is basically the end of humanity itself as we know it, to become completely alien of ourselves to the point where our own human existence is lost to the infinite space of the universe. That is how I see it, and that's not with delight one bit. Hopefully the actions of many does not allow this type of thing to happen, but that is how I see digital transhumanism becoming a complete reality, and how they are steering the way of the pandemic in favour for this. By humans becoming so alienated from their own born nature as we are increasingly becoming today, especially in the past year, between ourselves and others, that humanity end up adopting transhumanism as a way out from their own humanly conditioned psychosis, which has been bred on self-hatred and control. And I think, based on this, you should watch my video on my idea called cathartic nihilism, as that describes my views on the kind of self-hatred humans have made for themselves, which I think will lead to the favoritization of the favorism towards a complete transhuman digital existence. So thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Make sure to follow my newsletter for weekly articles at thoughtsonthinking.org. That is the most beneficial thing that you can do to support the channel. A link to that will be in the description. I'm also now on Odyssey, so subscribing over there would be great, but ultimately this video is about trying to connect the body and mind together. Do what you feel is the right thing to do, because we need some kind of synthesis. We literally cannot live in this polarized world that we are making for ourselves. And arguing about the little things is only going to make it all worse collectively. Because I know we all, most of us at least, want to collectively live within a world of peace and freedom. And we are just not heading that way at all, by the way everything looks, from what I can see. And that's the most honest thing that I can say in this video. So with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next one.